The opinions expressed in the following programs are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers Cable or Rogers TV.
Hi, and welcome to Politically Speaking. I'm David Shearman. It's a wintry day here in Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound, so I'm delighted to have our MP, Alex Ruff, here with me. Of course, we're talking virtually, and I think from the background, Alex, you're in your office in Owen Sound, and you're not snowed in yet.
No, not snowed in yet, but it does look like Ontario, right across the whole province, is in for some interesting winter weather over the next couple days.
And I'm sure we're all saying, okay, let's get the snow blowers warmed up. Let's get the shoveling done, shovels ready. This is an old-fashioned winter, if nothing else.
It is. I know I've had the privilege to get up on the Rideau Canal this winter once, just briefly, a few weeks back. Glad to see it open again because last year I think it was open for less than a week. And the winter before that, I should say, was not opened at all. So I think for that sort of traditional thing that's tied to Ottawa, it's great to see that sort of world recognized skateway to be open and functioning in full thing. So it's been not as much snow from when I was last in Ottawa, but I have a feeling that's changing here in the next few days as well because I think the prediction is they're going to get over 2 feet over the next few days. So, but been cold up there.
Well, I was looking at the weather forecast, not the weather forecast, the vigilance forecast, which is Environment Canada's way of saying, here's where the really nasty weather is, and Ottawa was in the bullseye. 40 centimeters of snow, they were saying, so plus winds.
I heard 70 over the next 5 days.
That could be well true, because hey, it's winter. It's Canada.
It's Canada.
Yeah. It's Canada. Actually, I saw some of your some soldiers doing cold weather immersion training. There's a Canadian Forces video up, and quite frankly, I'm glad I'm not doing that because they were in full gear and going into the water and learning how to survive with. I don't know whether you ever had to do that, but that's a real polar bear dip.
I've never had to go in in the ice really with my military gear on. I'm a qualified ice diver though, as a civilian, and so I have been under the ice scuba diving, but wear my dry suit. So it's really like wearing a snowmobile suit and not getting wet at all. The only thing that gets wet is your lips. So it's not too bad. It's still cold, but it's a different case when you're well prepared. But yeah, look, I know the Grey and Simcoe Foresters have members of the unit are actually heading up at the end of March, back up to the Arctic on exercise. So that's kind of neat, but it's obviously something that, can't forget that even our local reserve unit has a responsibility and contributes to the Arctic Response Group that is part of their mandate in the primary reserve. So it's there's lots of training, and again, when I was having that discussion with one of the members, talking about the tactics aspect and some of the issues, especially concerning everything that's going on up north, and it's like, well, really, the tactical aspect of military operations in the north, number one, is survival. It's really about who can survive and still carry on and do stuff that is so essential. So it's not about conducting your same sort of traditional attacks and stuff like that. It's more about presence and more about survival.
Right. That's right. And we also can't forget the indigenous
Canadian Rangers patrol group. But yeah,
yes,
in fact,
they are a critical part of that.
The leader of my political party, Mr. Polyev, and James Bazan, the Shadow Minister of Defense, were just up this a couple days ago, made a sort of one of the key platform announcements as part of Mr. Polyev's Canada First plan. and specifically around the Arctic, and talking of doubling the size of the Canada's Ranger Patrol Group, creating a Canadian Forces base in Iqaluit, and the importance of actually, getting the money and the equipment procured as part of NORAD modernization and continuing that work in the Arctic. So it was something that he just announced a couple of days ago, and the importance, and he highlighted the importance of our First Nations and Inuit and Indigenous members of the military, and how they contribute so much to protecting our North.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's go back to Ottawa, because you've been on you weren't on the front bench, but you certainly had a pretty good seat for the last few months in the House and in Ottawa. What was it like being that close to history?
What do you mean specifically? You got to remember, we've been the House has risen since December. And
I know, but we haven't talked since before the House went in, Alex. So we can go back as long as we want.
So really, in the historical part of what happened in the fall was really the government's refusal to comply with the will of Parliament, and so that's what happened basically all fall. There was very little legislation debated. It was a question of privilege. Because the government, opposition motion was put forth by my party back in the spring, and it passed in June of last year, to say the government needs to turn over all these documents tied to the Sustainability Development Technology Canada, or the Green Slush Fund, this approximately $480 or $386 million that this board sort of allocated in over 186 conflict of interest case found by the Auditor General, I believe. And so anyway, that motion passed. The government had, 30 days or something back in June to turn them over. Never did. So that was challenged by the Speaker. The Speaker ruled, the government is failing to comply. This is a question of privilege, and a question of privilege pretty much trumps everything. Although we did find out just before back in December that supply days have to occur, the movement of money. So that forced the government to allow opposition days, which, we moved a non-confidence vote back then, partly tied to the understanding we knew by that time that President Trump was going to be the new president, and based on his election platform, the possibility of tariffs. So we were pushing hard to have an election. So that whatever party was successful in the next would have been successful in that election would have the mandate of the Canadian people to negotiate. So unfortunately, in my opinion, that confidence motion failed. The NDP continued to support the Liberal government. So anyway, that's basically how we ended in December, and then what happened in early January. We saw the Prime Minister Trudeau's signal that he's not going to, that he's going to resign upon the Liberal Party electing a new leader and a new Prime Minister, because ultimately whoever that leader wins on March the 9th becomes the Prime Minister. He asked the Governor General to prorogue. The Governor General allowed Parliament to be prorogued until the 24th of March. So now we're just in this sort of weird spot in that Parliament hasn't been sitting. It didn't go back like it was supposed to a few weeks ago at the end of January, and we're just trying to deal with the unknown, I guess is the best way to describe, with what's going on down to the south of us and the impact that may have on Canada.
Yeah, and you're also waiting, I am sure, for the results of the Liberal leadership race, because that will initially determine the Prime Minister, who will come back on the 24th, and I'm sorry, the leader of the Liberal Party back on the 24th, and away we go. We don't know what's going to happen after that, although there's a lot of educated guesses. I'm presuming your party will move a non-confidence motion.
Yeah, look, it is confusing on exactly how things will play out. I've heard lots of rumors. I've talked to Liberal colleagues of mine. A lot of them are predicting that if Mr. Carney becomes the next prime minister and wins that leadership race, he's not an elected MP. So there's a lot of predictions that he will just trigger an election immediately because he has to, whoever the new prime minister is, they actually have to reappoint, even though Mr. Carney has the majority of the current Trudeau cabinet supporting him. Um, he still has to go through a whole cabinet appointment process, and they all have to get sworn in with him as the prime minister. But he's not an MP, so he can't sit in the House. So then the first thing that happens is a speech from the throne. He can go attend that in the Senate because that's different rules there in the Senate as the prime minister. But the throne speech is a confidence speech, a confidence vote. And then as well, because we're at the end of March, and part of the reason why I think the Governor General, may only allowed the prorogation to occur to the end of March or March 24th, is we need the budget and the final sort of supply days have to be discussed. So an opposition day would get moved, and the NDP have indicated, we'll see if Mr. Singh keeps his promise that he will vote to take the government down. But if that's the case, election could be triggered that week in March. But
Sure.
So in the end, the prime minister, whoever the new prime minister is, could just go to the governor general and dissolve parliament and call an election on their own, or we could be back at the end of March. And if all the opposition parties keep their word, an election would be triggered then, which would likely see an election in May 5th or May 12th, sometime in that time frame. Obviously, if it happens March 10th that it gets called for, we'd end up having one likely in late April. So
yeah, and Easter is late this year, so it probably wouldn't be around on the Easter weekend or sort of in that there
no, it can't be on Easter Monday. It's got, at least I don't think it. I shouldn't say that. I don't think there's actually any rules preventing it, but there is flexibility for how many days an election campaign can happen. So, but it'd be a Monday, either prior or afterwards.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating from both a political perspective and a policy perspective. I thought it was we live in interesting times, as the old saying goes, but I think at the same time, it's really helpful for us to understand just what is happening and why. We have a very different governance system in the Westminster parliamentary system. And the things you've explained are really helpful because it can be really confusing, especially when we get spillover from our neighbors south of the border. We have a different governance system, and you've very clearly outlined some of those differences.
Yeah, so it'll be fascinating to see how it all plays out here in the coming month, basically. And again, what everybody's sort of trying to figure out what and it's interesting to see how the liberal leadership candidates are positioning themselves. Although I found it fascinating that I think every single one of them is committed to getting rid of the liberal carbon tax, but at the same time, they promised that. I've only been doing this for 5 years, David, but I remember my first election in 2019 when they brought in the carbon tax that they said it would never go over $50 a ton. And then less than a year after they got elected, we're going to take it to $170 a ton. And then Mr. Guilbeault, who is throwing his support behind Mr. Carney, when he was questioned, well, will it ever go over $170 a ton? Will you promise that? No, he couldn't promise that either. So I take it all with a grain of salt for when some of these candidates are promising certain things around the carbon tax. But ultimately, it is interesting to see that they have gone in reverse on it. And I'd remind the viewers, too, that even Mr. Singh talked about that last fall, about that he doesn't believe the consumer carbon tax is the best way forward. So the good news for Canadians, in my opinion, is that the carbon tax's days, if everybody is to be believed that has said that they're committed to getting rid of it, the federal carbon tax should be gone sometime in 2025. We'll see how that plays out. But it's under the current government, it'll be interesting to see what kind of decision, as Mr. Carney has said he's going to remove it, but it is slated to go up another $15 a ton on April 1st. So it'll be interesting to see how that part plays out. And of course, the other elephant in the room, as we've alluded to, is the potential of tariffs from the United States. None of them have come into effect. We've been given this reprieve, for lack of a better word, and even with the most recent announcement a couple days ago that he's going to bring in a 25% tariff on aluminum and steel, none of that's scheduled to take place until March the 4th. So again, we'll see what happens as we get closer to that date of whether or not this is posturing or whether or not this is something that the U.S. is still going to bring in for sure. So there's lots of question marks and unknowns that is keeping everybody trying to plan around and be ready for in case it does occur.
Well, I'm sure here in Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound, people who are in business, farmers, are all thinking, okay, what is going to happen? It's all fine and good for us to buy Canadian, but we have our excess capacity, or in many cases, our export markets, our business is geared to export markets. I've been following some stuff around beef farming, for example, and cattle can go back across the border many times, several times in their lifetime. And so I'm sure being a farmer right now is something to be very anxious about.
Yeah, no, look, I was last month, I attended both the Grey and Bruce County beef farmers annual general meetings. I asked that specific question to them and told them to, keep me apprised of anything as things developed of what their impacts are, but talking specifically to some of the feedlot guys, if a blanket 25% tariff was to come in across all sectors, it would basically put the whole beef production sector, into disarray, because from a capacity, from a selling perspective, it would. But again, it's going to impact Americans just as much as it's going to impact Canadians, and I think that's something that again, needs to be continued to, and I'm encouraging the current government to continue to make sure they're messaging with the leadership down in the United States. I know my colleagues that have relationships and connections are reminding their connections down there as well that, look, this is a two-way street, and it'll be interesting to see what some of, especially those northern states, the governors, et cetera, that are going to be the most impacted by this. And I know I was listening to the radio just yesterday, I believe it was, the car manufacturing industry in particular, the impact this will have on certain jobs. And I was listening to somebody talk about a small company here in Ontario that produces a unique part for some cars, but if that part doesn't get produced and they're the only ones producing it, basically within a week, the whole assembly line will get shut down, because you can't assemble a vehicle if it's missing a key part that's buried somewhere within that vehicle. So our markets, our sort of industries are, especially automotive, but right across all sectors in North America, are so intertwined, and especially for the communities right along the border. But as you say, some products go back and forth, a dozen times by the time the final product is assembled. And if you're trying to impose tariffs, it gets really complicated. And unfortunately, in a tariff war, there are no winners. It's just messy. So we'll see what happens in the coming weeks. I think the next key deadline is March the 4th, if my memory is correct. So we'll see what happens over the next couple of weeks.
Let's just say we're in an anxious time frame, just domestically, politically. We are in an anxious time frame internationally. All you got to do is open your news provider's webpage, and there's always something new. And sometimes it can be quite disconcerting. You're obviously you're a soldier, and you've obviously worked with American soldiers as well, I'm sure, in all your career. Um, and we have military alliances with the United States, particularly the one of perhaps the closest one is NORAD, North American Air Defense, which is 70 years old. Do you see a shift, any of those things shifting, or at the operational level, will there be, unless there is other direction, continued work, cooperation, exchanges, those kinds of things?
Yeah, the lower level, I don't see anything changing unless, as you hinted at, there's specific direction from the highest levels on the U.S. side to say stop doing it. But I think it's exactly the opposite. I think they're actually looking for us to make sure we're pulling our fair share and to meet those commitments in an accelerated fashion. So I think this is so important. Why? And you've even seen it as we, hint at some of these leadership candidates for the Liberal Party. That they've indicated that they would accelerate getting to 2% of GDP being spent on our Canadian national defense to meet that NATO requirement. or NORAD modernization and doing that necessary commitments we need to do is a no-brainer, and there's nothing partisan about it in my viewpoint. We need to do it, and we need to do it faster. So ultimately, I think you could see that cooperation accelerating is to some extent, but it's actually a key to kind of maybe reassure the U.S. administration that we're serious about, our national defense, our border security, and stuff like that. So you'll see actually, I think, more of it because at the working level, there really isn't any impact other than trying to accelerate it. Where it gets sort of more interesting on the same sort of military side is I actually just in a preparation meeting virtually this morning with the Canada-NATO Parliamentary Assembly or Parliamentary Association that is going to partake in the NATO Parliamentary Assembly in Belgium. I had the privilege of going last year. It's taking place next week. I'm not going this year. One of the Conservative senators going on behalf of the Conservative Party, but I sit on the executive of that Parliamentary Association, the Canada-NATO Parliamentary Association. We were just talking about the concerns because, of course, there's been indications from the U.S. administration around Iceland, around other issues tied to Ukraine, etc. So there's lots of, I think, I wish I could go next week in some ways because there's some fascinating discussions going on about exactly, all the NATO partners getting to their 2% GDP as quickly as possible, but at the same time, what it means to the alliance and stuff like that with respect to NATO and Ukraine in particular. So there's a lot of unknown and anxiousness I would share, I think, even amongst all the allies on what is the so what, some of the discussions that are ongoing and some of the feedback. So it is somewhat uncharted that way, and we'll see what happens. But I know I reached out to my colleague that is attending and make sure that as soon as he gets back, he provides another sort of update or temperature gauge of what he's hearing in person, because again, you're getting it third hand right now, but that's the advantage of having these meetings in person and having these dialogues and seeing exactly what those concerns are, because ultimately the world's a chaotic place, and just because we have our own things going on here, and there's other things that Canada is still very much an active member and partner of.
Yeah, I mean, even the American Secretary of Defense announced this morning that Ukraine's claim on its territory that's been taken by Russia is unrealistic, and all of a sudden, everybody's going, okay. And he was talking about a NATO peacekeeping mission that would preserve the borders, but Ukraine would not be allowed to join NATO. This would be the basis of a new a peace with Russia thing. I mean, Alex, you're right in the middle of that. Those conversations are what you're hearing, I guess.
I haven't heard that latest one yet. I haven't read that, David. I'm glad you flagged it. I will dig that up. I'm not really at the middle because, again, you got to remember the nations themselves, the governments are doing that, government to government, military to military. The parliamentary thing that's going on that's happening next week back in Belgium is where that occurs between parliaments to parliaments with delegates from each of the respective countries. Canada hosted it in Montreal there in the fall, so I was at that one in Montreal as well. So it's not really the center of it. It's where you get the sentiment and some of the feelings. The more I'm getting exposed to it, I actually think there's a bigger role parliamentary assemblies can play in messaging to their respective citizens and about the importance of some of this and the concerns they have, et cetera, because ultimately that's the freedom we have as elected representatives. We can share that feedback and from a different perspective, right? It's not just about sort of the political alliances that occur or the government that's empowered at any one time, right? And there's a lot of commonality and cooperation that occurs at that level. So so anyway, like as I said, it's somewhat uncharted and some interesting times. So doing the best to stay on top of it. It's one of the frustrating things of having Parliament prorogued, though, is that those touch points and all the ways that we try to keep in communication, well, it's very difficult when the meetings aren't occurring in the first place with Parliament prorogued. The lone exception is the committee I sit on, the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians. We're not a committee of parliament, we're a committee of parliamentarians. So I actually have had 7 or 8 meetings over the last few weeks in person in Ottawa because we finalized one of our reports, and it's been now turned over to the Prime Minister, and we're working on getting the last one finalized, whether we can finalize it or not before the election occurs, because again, the one similarity from other committees is that there's no guarantee any of us get back on that committee. Yeah, we're the ones who've done all the study and have done all the work. And so we're just trying to finalize that stuff. But the advantage we have, because we're not a committee of parliament, is we never stop meeting. And in fact, we increased our meetings in order to get stuff done. So we did 2 months of meetings in 2 weeks, basically. So it's been some interesting times for sure there. But again, it's the frustration of having Parliament prorogued. It's hard to get the voices and concerns around these issues like potential tariffs, et cetera, and uncertainty to the government, because even when you do reach out, you can try to reach out to a minister directly. And I know something that we talked about before the show started that we'll get into is some of the work that I've been part of with the former Afghan women MPs. But on behalf of that group, I just sent an email to the Minister of Immigration, Minister Miller, just 2 days ago. And I haven't even got an acknowledgement other than the sort of auto reply back from his ministerial office that he's even acknowledged. And that was sent on behalf of, obviously, the whole group, which includes 2 Liberals, a Bloc member, the Green leader, the Green Party, the NDP, and myself. And so in the end, that's when you can look at them in the eye and tell them I just sent you an email, or you pass them a note across the chamber during question period that says I just sent you an email, and they look up and give you the thumbs up, or you see that they've read it, then they can't pretend that they never got it. So it's the little stuff that allows MPs as the elected representatives to do that a lot of Canadians never see, that is just the advantage of meeting in person and actually partaking in the democratic process that isn't just about debate in the chamber or votes in the House of Commons.
Okay. And with that, we're going to take a break, Alex, because somebody wants to talk to people, and we'll be back very shortly. Friends, I'm David Shearman. Yep, we'll be right back.
This program is brought to you by Rogers Xfinity, connecting you to more of what you love. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Sports is life. It's clear cut. Everything's out in the open. There's nowhere to hide. I had to prove myself more than anyone else.
You must be so proud of your son. He's gonna go pro. The sky's the limit.
There's always a winner and a loser.
You cannot reach the sky in broken cleats.
Of course, I always want to be the winner. And I did reach the sky.
Norman Kwong, the first Chinese-Canadian professional football player, still holds records to this day. He retired from the sport in 1960 and later became Lieutenant Governor of Alberta.
RTV Sports Wrap every Wednesday as myself, Spencer Byers, and our esteemed channel talk about everything you need to know going on in football, basketball, baseball, hockey, and soccer as we joust about what's going on in sports, keeping you up to date on Rogers TV.
Welcome back to Politically Speaking. I'm David Shearman. My guest today is Alex Ruff, who is the MP for Bruce-Grey-Owensound. Always a pleasure to have Alex here to share the heat in Ottawa. No, there's no heat in Ottawa. It's cold.
In fact, David, my office, because I'm in Confederation building, it's one of the older buildings that's due for renovations. It's old water radiators, and any days I've been in there, I've been wearing my coat pretty much to sit at my desk because it doesn't seem like the heat's been working very well. But whatever, it's got a roof over your head, and it's fascinating that way. But yeah, it's when I've been in Ottawa, it's actually been quite cold this winter.
And lest we think our members of parliament live or work in luxury and with deep carpets and heavily upholstered chairs, well, they got to wear their coats.
Yeah.
And actually, I have a funny feeling. I've heard that story. It's about 100 years old.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't doubt. It's there's certain things, but again, a lot of the buildings have been renovated over the last number of years. So some of my colleagues across all parties are actually in more comfortable, and I can't complain. I've worked, as you know, in the military overseas and in some pretty dusty and dirty and cramped quarters. So I can't complain at all about the office space I have in Confederation building. It's kind of neat to be part in a building that's as old as we do work in sometimes too.
For sure. Now, what we alluded to something that you've been involved in for quite a while since the fall of Afghanistan, and that is the rescue of Afghanistan's last female politicians. And you were, I gather, successful of getting some of the women out this past fall.
Yeah, well, it's been ongoing. So some of them come out throughout the last couple of years that we've been working on this. We sort of had I don't want to say somewhat of a public statement and event that occurred when we actually had national level coverage and a bit of a documentary shot on when Marcel, the former Afghan woman MP that was murdered. Her mother and her younger brothers, were successly arrived in Canada. So we met them at the airport, the majority of the all-party group. And so that was kind of unique. But we're still waiting on, I believe, 3 of the MPs that are still somewhat in limbo. And as I alluded to just before the break, I just sent an email off and a letter off that's signed by all of us to the minister to ask for an update and a meeting with him to sort of share with us what the holdup is on these final MPs and their families. So it won't end. And in fact, since that's sort of our day-to-day sort of things, because at least there's somewhat progress. There's again a holdup now with a couple of them. Or a few of them. we've been actually discussing with other initiatives that are tied to Afghanistan as an all-party group around UNICEF and education of girls and some programs there that, again, it gets complicated because of Canadian laws, because of the Taliban are the de facto government there. So how money flows and there's rules and regulations. And so we haven't completely, we've recognized the value by being an all-party group to work together. So we're just sort of negotiating on how we can continue to provide make a difference and try to get some additional support, in particular to young girls in Afghanistan, in a nonpartisan manner that can help focus, because you can accomplish a lot if you can find those commonalities. And that's the trick sometimes in politics, is finding where, not the aspects that you disagree with, the aspects that you actually can all agree on something. And then if you focus on them, you can actually move the yardstick. So it's always a challenge to find that sometimes, but ultimately there's people across all parties that are committed to doing that.
Right. And you have been successful in bringing a number of women MPs and their families out of Afghanistan. Where are they settled here in Canada, or are they in other countries?
A bit of both, but the majority of the ones that we were bringing here to Canada, and I believe it's to the tune of likely 60 or 70 of them, when you include their family members, have been successful, and they're spread right across Canada. They're in different locations. Some of them up in Ottawa, some of them in Toronto, some of them out in Alberta or Saskatchewan or British Columbia. So they're right across the nation, really. Obviously, we don't dictate or control that. The IRCC does a little bit of that, ideally in collaboration and cooperation with the provinces. Doesn't always happen, as we saw with the sort of the backtrack on and what the Liberal government's recognized on where they messed up on some of the immigration policies that they've had over the last couple of years. And we're still seeing some of the repercussions with that, with obviously the impacts to foreign students and the impact it's having on some of the education institutions across the country, from a business perspective, and their ability to keep programs viable, et cetera. So it's like everything, it's somewhat complicated, but yeah, we do feel we were successful, not 100%, but we definitely. And I'm not afraid to say I take a bit of pride in the fact that we were able to get some of these women and their families to safety.
And who knows? Well, they may not end up as in Parliament in their lifetime. Maybe their children will. And wouldn't that be cool?
Look, I've said it publicly. I don't know, maybe here on your show, David, but I know I've said it public on the radio. I've said it public in the House of Commons. I am confident that one of those women, or as you say, their kids, will, or any of those girls or women that were be able to be educated when Canada had our foot on the ground in Afghanistan for the better part of a decade, and women and girls were allowed to go to school and work out in public and et cetera, that one of them will be back to lead that country, ideally in my lifetime. It's just hard to predict whether it's 10 years from now, 20 years from now, or 3 months from now, right? The challenge with a lot of these countries that are dealing with volatility and dictatorships and autocratic regimes, that at the same time, things can flip pretty quickly, as we've saw in the last couple of years with the Arab Spring, as we just saw this in the last 6 months with, was it Syria, where things can flip fairly quickly. And you never know what could be done, but part of it is planting those seeds of education and understanding that you can have a better life if you want it.
Sure. Well, you had a private members bill that was in process, Bill C-377. And what happened when the House was prorogued? What happened to that bill?
So everything stops. Now, private members' bills aren't like government bills that literally die on the order paper when prorogation occurs. Private members' bills actually sort of just get reset to the last stage of the process that they had not completed. My bill had actually got reported to committee because it passed its second reading. and was studied there. It was only studied for a day or two. We ran into a little bit of an impasse there. The Liberals tried to pull a fast one on me. They did get a bit of NDP support and I think even the Bloc, because again, it's different people that sit on these different committees. I wouldn't allow them to fundamentally change my bill. And what I get at that is that for your listeners or viewers out there, my bill was just to allow parliamentarians, so MPs or senators, to apply to get a security clearance. It would not have guaranteed that they'd pass, and it wouldn't have guaranteed that they'd ever get access to information. Because when I dug into this, it's complicated on how you control classified information. It requires infrastructure and resources and safety checks put in place, and the issue with parliamentary privilege. When you get classified information, well, then technically, if you haven't sworn an oath or something like that, then it gets complicated. Like for me to be on the NSICOP, the National Security and Intelligence Committee, I actually waived my parliamentary privileges. I am now, not susceptible, but I've basically allowed myself to be, in order to get access, that I fall under what's called the Security of Information Act. It's actually now Security of Information and Foreign Interference Act or something. There was some stuff added to it with Bill C-70 last year, which could put me in jail up to 14 years, that if I was to report on something that is classified in nature in public. So there's these question marks. So I recognize, well, all right, I can't achieve and have the proper debate in the 2 hours of debate that I'm allowed, with no questions and comments other than to me as the sponsor. So I give one 15-minute speech or whatever and get 5 minutes of questions and comments. Well, that's really hard to have a fulsome debate and make people understand the severity. So I said, no, what, I'm just going to take the first step. On committee, the Liberals tried to introduce a pile of amendments to it that would have taken it right through and said, well, yes, you can apply, but then you're going to swear this oath and you're going to have to do this and you have to do that. Like, my bill was 2 sentences. If you took out the preamble, the change to the Parliament of Canada Act was 2 sentences. They added 1.5 pages of additional information to it that was never debated, never voted on the first time round. So I refused to let that go to a vote, basically, in the limited time. And then that committee, because it was the Procedural and House Affairs Committee, had a lot of other stuff to study. It never came back up. And once it never came back up and they never finished looking at it, they are mandated to report it back to the House as unamended. So the bottom line from the feedback we heard from some of the experts, there was 2 amendments that I put forward that addressed the concerns from the security experts. And one was, I was going to change the title a little bit to say security clearance applications versus need to know. And because that was where it was confusing some people. And secondly, I was adding in an aspect that this, just so it was crystal clear in the bill itself, that this does not guarantee access to classified information. And so if the bill, so say if Parliament does return in March, and there isn't a confidence vote, or if there is, the government survives, and the question of privilege gets dealt with, because, well, it's being dealt with, but there's been no private members' business. So it's been really this stalemate that's been occurring just because the government refuses to comply with the majority will of Parliament. But I'm just saying, if it was to go through that, and even if I was to get to what's called report stage and then third reading, in reality, there's just not enough time for my bill to pass. So I will work on it if I have the privilege of getting reelected after the next election. I will work on either bringing it forward again as private members bill, or if my party has the privilege of forming government, I will try to influence that government to incorporate it into actual government legislation, which then does allow for a more fulsome debate around some of these issues and questions around things like parliamentary privilege and the extra protections that are required and infrastructure required. But the more I know and learn and that I've brought forward from my previous experience too, we need to continue to focus on this stuff, and we need to take it more serious as a nation. And we just need to, and part of that is educating Canadians, but first and foremost, you got to educate the people that are elected to represent those Canadians, because then they can get that message back too. So I just think there's a lot of work that can be done, and I'm committed to pushing forward to make those changes through whatever tool I have at my availability as the elected MP for Bruce-Grey-Owensound. And through the tools that are available to us at the House of Commons.
In other words, more to come.
More to come.
More to come. Well, this leads me into another bit of an interesting. We've talked in the past about the case manager function that MPs do, and MPPs as well, and I think all politicians do, which is to take care of their constituents. And you came up with a situation that arose during COVID. And you've been involved in that, and that's the relationship of the Amish community to the pandemic measures, because the Amish community found itself in a very, very difficult situation.
Yeah, so what ended up happening during the pandemic, obviously, movement and travel to the U.S. was somewhat restricted, unless, of course, you're an American citizen, right? And a lot of the Amish in our area are actually dual citizens. So they still could go back and forth. They just had to comply with certain measures that the Canadian government, Liberal government, had brought forward. Unfortunately, those rules, as everybody, I don't know if they can remember, because I think a lot of us wanted to forget a lot of the stuff that went on. However, the point was it was changing constantly. I know my office and myself, I had a heck of a time trying to stay on top of it, because I'd have constituents reach out because a relative or a parent or a grandparent died in the States, and could they get there, and what are the rules, what do you got to do, how do you quarantine, how do you report this, what do you need for testing? Well, so ultimately a lot of the information wasn't shared by the government with the Amish people, because of course they don't have internet, they don't have television, they don't have telephones. And so, but they were still traveling because they're dual citizens, family stuff that they're doing. Again, they are a very close-knit community, don't interact a lot, but unfortunately when some of them were coming back across the border, they were being fined under the Quarantine Act. Wasn't clear exactly what they were being fined for. Some of the allegations that, they didn't have it uploaded to their ArriveCan app. Well, they don't have phones, so how are they uploading anything to an application that they don't have the technology for, or failure to get the right PCR test? But again, the government had never notified them what to do or what test they needed. They stopped. They kind of knew through the rumor mill, all right, we got to get a test before we go back to prove that we're, whether we're positive or negative, and which determines exactly the subsequent measures that you have to do. They stopped at the border, on the American side, say, hey, I need to be tested. Yeah, get this test. They get the test. They show, no, that's a rapid test. You need a PCR test. But they weren't actually told, well, you can go back and get the other test, at least in the one case that I'm more aware of that was actually challenged, by the young brother and sister, Amish brother and sister. And then failure to quarantine, although in the case that was challenged, they were fined for failure to quarantine, except that it was after they were questioned by the agents that they said, yes, will you quarantine? Well, can we quarantine at our house or our farm? Well, yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, quarantine. They still gave them the tickets, called a taxi, put them on the public bus, and sent them back to Grey County. So if that would have got in front of a judge, I think the fine would have been tossed. Unfortunately, a large portion of the community never challenged the fines, because they issued the fines like parking tickets or speeding tickets that they don't deal with, because they don't get parking tickets or speeding tickets on their horse and buggy. And so therefore, they didn't understand to challenge it or to fight it, that you got to fill it the back and mail the part back in. So then they were found guilty in absentia. the fines were to remind your viewers were like $6,300 a shot. And if you got nailed with two fines on one go, like you're talking $13,000, the community in the end ended up getting something like the better part of $300,000 or $400,000 in fines. And where it really got complicated is that the provincial courts sold the debt off to collection agencies that then took liens against some of their properties. And so it got complicated. So some media did pick up on it. Some other local, friends and neighbors of the Amish in our area as well. I brought it up in the House of Commons a few times with literally limited success with the federal government doing anything about it. But ultimately what happened was the Democracy Front or something like that, it's an organization, met with them, took on the case, did some fundraising from Canadians that felt were sympathetic to the issue that the Amish were dealing, which then allowed their lawyers to challenge it. From my understanding, they're still dealing with some of them, but the liens, once they were able to get them at least reopened within the provincial court process, and they're going through that stand, and as soon as that happened, the liens were at least lifted, and in a lot of the cases, they have dropped the fines completely, or in some cases, I think there's one case where one of the Amish did plead guilty, but the fine was dropped, and they just, so I don't have all the details, but at least the situation, common sense, in my opinion, has prevailed. It's not in the public's interest to be discriminating against a certain segment of our society that for religious reasons and, don't use technology, and are very close-knit and isolated really for the most part, and are not in my opinion, weren't a public safety risk to anybody back even during the pandemic, but definitely not now to be trying to take somebody's farm away from them because they got the wrong test when they crossed the border. It's a stretch too far. So I'm just glad that I was able to help them navigate the process a little bit, but I'm more thankful for other Canadians stepping up and taking an active interest in I believe in just doing the right thing.
Well, it's good news. I mean, yeah, one of the realities is the legal process takes time. What's the old expression? The mills of the gods grind slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. Well, this is a case of, the timeline of our legal system has its own life. But I'm glad to hear that you were able to get this. I mean, get this move forward. I mean, at its base, it is a freedom of religion issue. And so, bravo, well done. Well done. But I think it also outlines, as I said, the case manager function or the taking care of the people function that our elected representatives do. And you don't often get a lot of kudos for that. But on this one, well done.
I appreciate it, David. I wish the Amish actually voted too, because then there'd be more benefit. There would be a personal, but to be frank, I'm getting I appreciate the kudos or whatever, because ultimately, this is just, as I said, doing the right thing. And it's an aspect of the job that, you have to, I'm a big believer in trying to do what you can, especially for those people that are sometimes don't have the same advantages or resources at their fingertips to do it. And I do take my role and privilege of being the elected representative to do what you can to shed light on some of these, what I view as injustices.
Sure. Well, let's move on to another. We got about 5 minutes. So I thought I would ask you about a situation that's actually, I've been wondering about myself. The coronation medals. What's happening with that? Because I keep hearing of Canadians who are receiving them, but Bruce-Grey-Owen sounds really quiet.
Yeah, well, we know. I got a ton of nominations in. It was tough to whittle that down. I used, I had a couple other people that we formed a review committee to go through, myself and two others. I had actually one of my staff take the names off of them so that it was completely, didn't know who we were sort of marking them, but we went through them and whittled it down to the number of medals that I was allocated as the MP. Originally it was 20. I was able to get a few more. I had to have all those names into the Governor General at the end of December. But I just got notified literally yesterday or the day before that they finally have approved all the names that that was submitted. There was one, slowed it down because one of the names that somebody had submitted to me that we had submitted that made the cut was actually nominated by another organization and was accepted that way. So that's part of the whole confirmation process to make sure that they're not awarding one person multiple medals. And so ultimately we've just been notified. So they're in the mail. I just need to get into the process here in this coming week of starting to notify. But they encourage us not to book an actual forum to present them until we've actually received them, because they say, well, mailing could take upwards of 4 to 6 weeks before we get them. And so you can't organize something if you don't actually have them. I never thought I should reach out to them because I do have to go back to Ottawa for a National Caucus meeting. I could just drive to the Governor General's or wherever they have them and pick them up and drive them back myself. That might be the smarter way to do it, because then I guarantee I get them in time. But the other interesting challenge that ties in everything we were talking about is they want them all presented before the end of March of this year. Well, if we get an election called, then it gets really confusing, because I'm very much restricted, even though I'm technically still the MP until the election night. During the campaign, I'm restricted on what I'm allowed to do, as a candidate seeking re-election. So it gets complicated that I'm still trying to get answers on. So ideally, they show up in the next week and we can turn this around, and potentially in the first week of March, I'm thinking around March the 1st, or 2nd, I might be able to run an event, likely in Owen Sound, where I could present most of these to the very worthy candidates that were nominated by people from across the riding.
Excellent. Well, it's a good thing to hear, because it's one of those things. I happen to know a couple of the people who received them in other parts of the country, but it's good to hear. Very, very good to hear. So we'll just, I guess this is one of those things where we'll just have to stay tuned.
Stay tuned, and as soon as I got them and I have something, I'll be putting out a press release for sure, with the names and where the event's going to occur, etc.
Mm-hmm. Well, it'll be really interesting to see, because one of the things I think we need to do is lift up our exemplar citizens, to say, hey, these are the people we want to we give thanks for, because they've done good things for our community. Well, my producer is telling me we're almost out of time, Alex. So I want to thank you for being a part of this program, Politically Speaking, today. I do think of you often as I see the headlines in the newspaper, and I think, gee, what's Alex doing about that?
Well, look, David, I appreciate the opportunity to come in and chat. It's always fascinating questions that you put forward, and where our dialogue goes on different tangents. But I know it's another great way for your viewership and the people out there to just get an update on what's going on. Again, I encourage them at any time to reach out to me at my office here in Owen Sound at 519-371-1059, or email me at alex.ruff@parle.gc.ca. And again, we're coming up on National Flag Day this Saturday. I encourage people to wear their red and white, fly a national flag, put the Canadian flag up in their window, up a flagpole if they have it in front of their house. Right now, the one thing that some of this uncertainty that's been going on is there has been a sort of coalescence of national unity, and I think that we can all play a part in that. So
Connect with us by visiting our website or email us at comments@rogerstv.com.
Hi, I'm Lynn from Third Eye View, and welcome to a brand new season that we're looking forward to. We have some return guests and some brand new guests. And in the meantime, enjoy the rest of your summer, stay safe.
Mondays. Grant is genuinely seeking a wife and a mother for his kids.
I've been alone for a long time. I'm excited to get engaged. I'm excited to be with my person. It's almost like this is too good to be true.
You did me dirty.
I heard some things you said to someone.
That's a lie. I know for a fact that I didn't say that. One of these